All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dedicated Show. This is Kate Strashny, the host of the Dedicated Show, and today we're talking about Dataware for and CEO at Cinchy. He's going to share insights on Dataware and Zero-Copy Integration. It's an emerging framework in data and application management. This is the approach to building applications that technically eliminates traditional copy-based integrations via ETLs and APIs and enables meaningful access controls that can be universally enforced and greatly enhances data visualization. Now, before I bring on our guest, I'm going to ask you everybody a question here. I'm going to put it up on the screen as well. Are you familiar with Dataware? So as you're joining us, let us know if you're familiar with it. How many people are familiar with terms? How many people are not familiar with this? This way, we'll know where to take the conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and check in on the comments and definitely let us know where you're tuning in from as well. I think that's always super interesting. And as you do that, I'm going to go ahead and bring up our special guest here, Dan DeMers. Hello, welcome to the Dedicated Show.
Hey, happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. And where are you tuning in from?
From Toronto.
Toronto. That was the last place I visited before the pandemic. I think it was a month or two right before everything started. It was and I actually think that's where you and I first met. That was there was a big data conference in Toronto.
That's right. Yes, I remember.
Cinchy had a booth. Yep,
yes.
That's where we met.
Yes.
We've got some comments coming in. Let's say hello to Shruti. Hi, Shruti. Thank you for joining us. And just a quick reminder, as you're joining, the question of the day is, are you familiar with Dataware? If you're not, you're definitely going to be familiar with it after this session. I see Ravit's here. Hello, hello. All right, so Dan, for those who don't yet know you, let's start with that. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I kind of have two hats these days. I'm the CEO and co-founder at a company called Cinchy, which is headquartered out of Toronto, although we're hiring all over the world these days. And I'm also the president of the Data Collaboration Alliance, which is a not-for-profit that was bootstrapped by Cinchy, but with the goal of engaging other vendors and privacy experts on the creation of new standards, including the ZeroCopy Integration standard. My background prior to founding Cinchy is I used to work in financial services, worked at some of the biggest banks in the world, always in IT, building pretty complicated systems in different business lines within financial services. And that's where I met my co-founder, Karin, and saw firsthand how complicated it is to build and maintain and support enterprise systems in a complex organization. And I was surprised that over half of the IT capacity was just spent doing integration, essentially moving data from your left pocket to your right pocket to your back pocket to your coat pocket and then back to your left pocket again, but it doesn't look the same anymore. And noticed that was getting worse as more and more applications started to surface.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes in your purse, right? For those who don't have pockets. So,
for sure. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for providing that background. It seems like most people who are joining us are not familiar. So Heather says this is new to her. Travis has not heard of it until he saw this announcement. Akref is also not familiar, tuning in from France. Awesome. Thanks for joining us. So question that we'll start with, I guess, is what is Dataware?
Yeah, so it's actually a concept that goes all the way back to, I think the first reference was 1986. It was a professor in the US named Gordon Everest. And he wrote a book on database concepts and design. And one of the chapters was fascinating because it talked about a future prediction where data becomes independent of the applications. Whereas today, and up until that point, and still largely true today, data exists because it's created by an application, and then separately it's shared across applications. So the idea of hardware, then software, and now dataware, where dataware is of equal status, that was the first reference to that. But it's really centered around a number of aspects, but the way I like to think of it is the humanization of data. Because today, when you're using applications, the applications provide a simulation of a data experience, but they're limited by the application code. You're not actually interacting with the data directly. You're interacting with the application experience, which could be a report, it could be a GUI, it could be a mobile app, and then that is implemented often with code or configuration, which then in turn interacts with the data. So you're disconnected from the data. The app, in many ways, becomes a barrier that separates you from the data.
And I'd love to get into this a bit more. So what's wrong with this approach?
Well, there's a number of problems with it. The first is that you're ultimately limited in your ability to interact with that data, because if the experience that you're using doesn't have a code path for what you're trying to accomplish, you're kind of just out of luck. So a simple example, let's take my ability to interact with my email via, let's say I'm using Gmail or something. I'm limited by my email client in terms of what I can do. Maybe I want to send an email to all of my contacts who are also in my CRM, who are located in the country of Canada, and I want to, where we've had past deals. I can't do that because there's no code path for that. There's no experience for that. And not only that, the application is limited because it contains only a silo of data. It doesn't have access to all the data that I have access to through other applications. So that's the problem from an end user perspective, is every interface is both limited in terms of functionality and limited in terms of data. There's no universal interface. But there's the other side of it, which is for the people who are building and supporting these systems at the other end, the fact that the data is contained inside of individual applications means you have to do this thing called integration. People want integrated systems, but they don't want to do integration because it's incredibly expensive. APIs, ETLs, doing reconciliations. This is half of the work of IT all over the world.
Thanks for that. And I think it'd also be helpful to define the term integration. It's going to set us up. I want to take this next. So what's included in integration?
So when I say integration, I'm really referring to the integration of data.
Right.
So it's, and there's lots of, and sorry, you were cutting out there. I don't know, is my internet okay, or is it, am I cutting out at all?
I don't know. Let's ask the audience. I can hear you and see you just fine.
Oh, okay.
So guys, let us know who's having audio issues. Let us know who's having video issues, and we'll fix it. This is Dan. This is how we prove to them we're live. Remember?
Absolutely. Yes.
Sorry if I was cutting out. I'll repeat the question. I just wanted you to explain to the audience, what is data integration with Compass?
I see. Right. So there's hundreds, maybe even thousands of different ways that you can accomplish it, but it's essentially when you have an application that needs to access data that is managed by another application, and you need to enable that access, and you can do that through doing things like ETL or ELT, or building APIs, or there's, even API is a broad concept that has, you can have REST endpoints that are changing over JSON. There's lots of different protocols, lots of different formats, but they all require effort. None of them are effortless, and most of them, if not all of them, ultimately result in data being copied across application boundaries. And as soon as you copy data, you lose control over that data.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And I want to get into my follow-up question to you, but just letting you know, it seems to be working. They're saying it's fine. It was me, though. Dan Sanchez says it was me, so you're all good. And Scott Taylor's saying that finally someone's tackling integration at the data layer, so he's excited about this. Now, you mentioned that copying leads to issues because you might lose control of that data. And every time I hear of Cinchy, I think of a term called ZeroCopy Integration. So let's talk about that. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, well, just imagine if the world was such that you could copy money. Just imagine what would be your net worth if you could just print money and copy it. So why is it illegal to copy money? Why is there controls built into physical currency? And why does that control exist? Well, it's because it has value. Well, if data has value, but you can copy it, doesn't a copy devalue it? And not only that, if I give you a copy of my data, how do I limit what you're able to then do with that copy? maybe you can make another copy and send it to somebody else, and so on and so forth. So I may sign up to an application and give it my personal data and authorize that application, but I really don't have any control over that. I may agree to some terms, and there's a legal structure in place, but it's not a technical control. I cannot stop that data from being hacked, that data from being just openly shared, from being leaked. I can't stop. I don't know who can see it. I can't ever change my mind and take that data back. Even if I request it, was it, if I exercise my right to be forgotten, was it actually exercised? Like, who knows?
Right.
Because it's copied, and that's the problem. And that creates all kinds of consequences for the world, in addition to the fact that it's just incredibly inefficient and makes it very hard to build systems as a result of that. So zero-copy integration is really a different way of building systems that the apps are separate from the data, such that the data can be collaborated on across applications without needing to be copied. So it's a very simple idea, but there's so many examples of that in the world. Even just look at the World Wide Web. When one website has a hyperlink to another website, it's pointing to that website. It's not getting a copy of that site. It just links to it. So it's a network of links, and that's how data actually should work. And that's not how it works in traditional copy-based integration approaches. So that's really what we're talking about, is creating standards that change how you build digital systems that enable data to be treated as if it actually has value.
I think that's very, very eye-opening, the way those two examples that you just provided. One was treating data not only as an asset, but treating it as currency, right? So you're not devaluing it by copying it, or having people manipulate it and mess with it and lose its reliability and integrity. And the other example for the website, I think it just logically makes sense, right? Why haven't we been doing this all along?
Yeah, and there's good reasons. If you just think of the history of the digitization of data and information, it had to be this way in terms of we had hardware, and then we invented software. So hardware existed before software. So if you think of the invention of software, go back to like 1938, and imagine you're witnessing the first ever real running software that demonstrates that it's not some science fiction, it's real. You can actually alter the behavior of a physical machine without altering the physical machine. You can provide instructions that can change what the machine does. That's like black magic. There's no way that's possible. You just take it for granted. And well, today you just open up an iPhone, you open up an app, and a virtual keyboard pops up. You don't think anything of it. But that to the citizens of 1937 and 1938, that would have been impossible. Right? So the idea of Dataware is similar in that it just makes sense once you see it, once you experience it, once you touch it. But it doesn't make sense until you see it and touch it and understand it. It's impossible. There's no way. So like, why is data trapped inside of these applications? It's not because people are dumb or stupid or making a bunch of mistakes. It is necessary because when software was first created, it had to remember information, right? So you can provide it instructions, but if it had no memory, you provided instructions and then it forgets what it did. You can't remember. So that's not going to be very powerful, right? So for software to go to the next level, it had to have a memory. Well, that means it needed to store information somewhere. So the origins of the digitization of data were to serve as the memory for your program. That's where it started. And then we were so caught up on the fact that we can now build digital solutions to replace or augment manual paper-based processes that we weren't even aware of thinking that we were making silos and copying data and whatnot. As soon as we build application number 2 that needs to interact with application number 1, we're going to do integration. Okay, great. We'll just send copies of data, no problem. And then we started to wake up to realize that, wait a minute, this information that these applications are storing actually has some value beyond just acting as the memory. What if you could query that? You can actually get intelligence from that. So you could reuse the memory of the applications and turn that into things like predictions and all this cool stuff. And that's where we started to get really focused on, okay, well, wait a minute. The data is siloed. So to benefit from that, we need it to be somehow connected. So let's create a data warehouse. Let's create top down, bottom up. Let's look at data marts. Let's look at data lakes and lake houses, and all these different strategies to enable an access point that gives you the ability to look at data as if it were all connected and not fragmented.
Right.
So we were so focused on enabling analytics without actually changing the paradigm of how the applications are managing data. And that's really what Dataware is doing. Is it's not just looking at it from an analytical perspective. It's looking at it from how we build applications.
Yeah, thank you for that. By the way, we have so many questions coming in. I can't wait to get to. But first, I think one question I'll ask that I think is really important. If you can tell us the difference between data lake, data mart, Dataware, data mesh, data fabric, because I think at this point, all these new terms are sort of swimming around people's heads. I think it will be really helpful to just set the stage and sort of go through what's what.
Yeah, do you mind if I share? I'm going to pull up a deck.
Yeah, go for it. I'll pull that up right now.
Might be easier to visualize that.
Yep.
All right. Looks all pink on when I'm looking at the screen share through yours. Hopefully it's not pink for everybody else.
It's not pink for me, guys. It's the screen pink. I can.
Yeah, it literally looks pink, but as long as it's not pink for
slide. It says integration and more integration. But let's go to the comments. Right. Don't let us know if there's an issue.
All right, cool. So what I'm going to do is kind of go through the different terms that you mentioned, like you mentioned data warehouse and data marts and all these other things. And these are very simplistic illustrations, but and what they're doing is they're depicting, and they're very simple, so there's a lot more nuances and complexities than is shown here. But if you look at the idea of a data warehouse, so here you have Mitesh, and he's using 4 applications, and those 4 applications need to somehow share data. So they're going to build integrations, APIs, ETLs, et cetera, either at the data layer or at the application layer to do something so that the apps can work in an operational context. So those red lines are building integrations. But you can't do a report off of the consolidation of that data because it's not consolidated anywhere. Therefore, you create a warehouse, which is basically a copy of data from your operational systems that's organized in a format that lends itself to reporting and analytics. This is oversimplifying it because it's just showing a single box for the warehouse, but there's top down versus bottom up and different strategies where you're creating the combination of warehouses versus data marts, which are more business line specific. Do you do the mart first and then roll it up into the warehouse, or do you do the warehouse first and then turn that into the marts? But what it's doing is it's enabling reporting and analytics off of a copy of data that is deduped and cleansed and organized in theory, where it's copied from these systems. But if I add a new application, I have to build more integrations here, and I have to build more integrations here. And who the heck's going to own this data model for the entire enterprise as it grows in scale? But the key thing here is that what it doesn't do is eliminate integration, right? So Dataware is the core concept is the elimination of integration with an access not copies model. So I'm still doing integrations here. I'm still doing integrations here. So Data Warehouse doesn't solve the integration problem. It enables analytics, but data virtualization is kind of doing the same thing, but instead of physically copying the data, it's a virtual view, although it may do caching. But it's the same concept. I'm still doing app-to-app integrations. My reports are now using this virtual layer, which has mappings to transform data models and structures and representations from the way this app represents it to the way that you want it to be represented to reports. But it's still the same concept and doesn't eliminate integration. Master data management is really a byproduct of the fact that you may have customer data in the yellow app, the red app, and the green app. You've got John Smith, Johnny Smith, and Mr. Smith. Are they the same person? Who knows? You do data mastering to determine that you basically create a 4th copy, which has rules to determine which of those is the real one, and is it one or are those 3 different people? Again, it doesn't eliminate integration. So you're still going to do app-to-app integrations. You're going to do app to your MDM solution, and you still have to solve for analytics. Data lakes are essentially recognizing that the organization and curation of that data is very hard. So you need to take copies in raw form, knowing that storage is cheap and you can organize the data later. So I'm going to basically dump it in a raw location, and I'll figure out what to do with it later, knowing that there's advancements in mechanisms to interpret and understand this raw data. But I'm kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit because ultimately I can't use it until I organize it. Hence the introduction of the lake house, which is let's reintroduce the warehouse with a twist, though. Instead of sourcing the warehouse direct from the applications, let's source it from the raw data So take the raw data from the apps and then organize that and then build your reports and analytics and AI and ML off the back of that. And a data mesh, which is one of the hottest topics, and I'm a big fan of this concept. And really what it is, although it's centered on the analytical plane, is the idea of taking domain-driven design borrowed from software architecture and applying it to data architecture, where you're managing data as a product within domains, and those domains serve as governance boundaries. So what it's great at is enabling federation and autonomy and business alignment of your analytical plane. But it doesn't really change how you build the applications, and it doesn't eliminate integration, right? That's not what it's trying to solve for. So it's not like any of these things are failing. They're just not trying to solve the integration problem. And a data fabric is trying to simplify integration, but it's not trying to eliminate it. So the idea of a data fabric is, conceptually, think of it as kind of working how your Wi-Fi network works in your home. If you get a new device and you bring it into your home, you don't have to wire it up to every other device that's in your home. You do one thing, you connect it to your network. So it's applying a network-based architecture to simplify the integration. So, but then you could look at microservices and APIs, and again, it doesn't eliminate integration. So all of these things are each solving individual problems, and they work if you implement it correctly, and they all have their pros and cons. But what none of them do is eliminate data integration.
Wow, this is awesome. So it's almost as if you knew I was going to ask this question, which is a completely off-the-cuff question I wanted to ask. Thank you so much for explaining this to everybody. We do have some follow-up questions. Here's one from Travis. He's asking, is Dataware this big hyperlinked database?
It's not a database, it's a data network, but you can think of it as a network of databases that are linked. So as an example, like I'm looking at our data network. So you're seeing all of our information, and it's all interconnected. You can see the different nodes. So there's employees as an example, and if I zoom out, I can see all the connections that it has. But this doesn't mean that all the data is in a single location. It could be geographically distributed. It could be organized into domains. So if I open up the little left navigator, you can see all the different domains that we have here. So as an example, if I look at employees, you can see there's the employees data set, but it's actually in a domain called employee success, which is what some companies may call human resources. But that domain, there's all of our HR data. And separately, I can look at let's say our marketing data or sales data. And this is for our company, meaning other companies are going to have a different model. They're going to have different data products. They're going to have different domains. They're going to organize it differently. And even we change our mind over time, but there's all of our marketing data. So you can see, there's all the marketing data that has links to each other, but it also has links to all these other domains. Hopefully that's visible, but it also has links to all the HR data, right? Wherever you see a purple line or yellow line. And if I grab any data from any domain, you're going to see the same phenomena. Like there's all of our product data. So like the capabilities and whatnot. And similarly, if I just grab that and move that, you're going to see the same phenomena. So what you're seeing though is a universal interface that treats data like a network, just like how Google Maps is a representation of the Earth that allows you to search and zoom in and infinite scroll. And you can even go from the satellite view. So think of this as the satellite view, but maybe you want to go into the street view, right? So I just want to go into the data where I can then change it, ask any questions of it. And here I can see our employees as an example. But this data may be coming from different sources. It could be sourced externally, internally from multiple applications. It could be originated inside of Dataware. It could be distributed across many servers. It could be distributed across many regions. The universal interface, it doesn't mean that it's all in one physical location, for the same reason that the World Wide Web, as that connected lake of documents, doesn't mean there's only one web server.
Right. First of all, I think this is super cool. And I love how you're sharing with us how you're actually using this at Cinchy with Cinchy data. My question to you is, who else is using Dataware? And are there specific maybe industries or sectors that are better suited for using Dataware at this point?
Yeah, so when we started, we were selling into, this goes back approaching 4 years now since we've been in the market, but we were much smaller 4 years ago than we are today. But we started with financial services, partly just because that was my background. So, many of our customers are some of the biggest banks in the world, and they're using it for like literally dozens of different use cases. But since then, we've expanded into other sectors and also into mid-sized organizations and even small organizations. one of the things that was important to me, because I worked at companies that had 350,000 employees and had been in business for hundreds of years and had tens of thousands of legacy systems and had billions of dollars in technology spent every year and tens of thousands of programmers, lots of complexity. And having a technology that can work in that environment to basically untangle that complexity, but also making it work so if you had a two-person company, you could use it. That's important. So like this network view that you're seeing here, this is the present. This is the company of today. But if I just rewind, let's go back to the day that we started, right? This was the beginning of our journey when we had two people. This is the day we installed the platform, and it's empty, with the one exception being it has the meta model. So the origin of the universe is a single table called tables. The first row of data in that is itself, and then it does the Big Bang, which is the creation of this meta model. But then as I go forward through time, we started to build our business. And so we're a two-person company, and we're thinking about hiring some people. So we've got, we're opening up jobs, and see how employees here is a lot smaller than it is in the present. And it was called Cinchy employees instead of just employees. But if I go back in between, I went too far ahead, actually. You can see it actually started with, there was our HR system, and it was an isolated data set called employees when we had the two. So it started off as almost like an experiment. And some experiments fail. It's like natural selection. But this node found some friends. It's a social network, right? It got connected. Whereas other ones may have just died off. And as it goes forward through time, it gets even more popular. So look at employees now. He's got lots of friends. He's getting bigger, more confident. And you can see even today, it's still one of the larger objects, right? And now it's just called employees instead of essentially employees. The scheme is evolving. So what this means, though, is it could be small companies, it could be massive companies. What they all do, though, is they start with the same starting position. The only question is, do you have a legacy around this? And if you do, well, you're not going to replace all of that. You're going to use this as you implement new projects and connect the data as you go, as you deliver those projects. But if you don't, and you're a net new company, well, you don't have the legacy. So as you're building your capabilities, you're going to do the same thing. So your journey is very similar for a two-person company or a 300,000 person company.
Yeah, and I love how the employees, I think towards in the now, it looks like it's the sun in the middle of the whole universe, and it's yellow. It's like,
yes.
I love that.
Well, it's interesting because and this visualization that you're seeing, that comes with it. But you would think that organizations would be customer centric. But you have a lot more links to your employee data than you have to your customer data. But one of the things I've realized is when we start to look at our customers and looking at the shape of their network, it's like a work of art. Like ours looks like this, and I can't show you what our customers' ones look like, but they all are beautiful, distinct. It is truly like a snowflake where each one is unique. But yeah, for us, employees is very large, but this view that you're seeing here, it's determining the size based on the connectivity of data. But like I could show you just really quickly, I'm going to do, you can customize that. So I'm going to open up an alternate one that I just created this morning, which basically takes the company employees and renders it with the same kind of visual experience. So there you can see there's me. And it looks like I'm bigger because I've configured the mass to be based on the total headcount. And then you can see basically all the my direct reports, and then when they have direct reports, and when they have direct reports, and you can see all the different people on the left. But then I can slice it by different dimensions. So maybe I want to look by the different teams. So there's the marketing team, there's our product dev team, here's our product management team, here's our sales team. So there's all the sales people there, and but maybe I want to do that by role and look at developers, or maybe I want to look at it by personality. So we do personality profiling. So here's the captains. So it looks like our captains seem to be concentrated in our sales team. And let's look at our architect personalities and influencer like you. So with being able to visualize it in any dimension where you're configuring what are the nodes, what are the edges, what determines the mass, and with mass comes the gravitational pull. And this is just one example of being able to build a visual experience on top of data. When data is not siloed, it opens up all these really cool possibilities. And whether I want to look at an org chart like this, and by the way, I can just click on somebody and then click on open, and then it will bring me to the record. It will go again to the street view, of the data. And here it's going to show me and a 360 view of me as an employee.
Oh,
You know,
nice.
there's my personality profile, and there's my my temperament and my communication style and my career goals and open tasks and out of office events and everything.
Oh, wow.
And I can do the same with anyone here. But again, I created this in probably about 15 minutes
Hmm.
because the data was already there. That's always the hard part, right?
Right. Oh,
Visualizing is easy, except for the fact that the data is everywhere, it's nowhere. And
yeah,
but maybe
that's
I
true.
don't want to look at it this way. Maybe I want to look at it in a completely different skin. So maybe I want to look at it in an org chart. So let's look at it in a completely different skin. So here's the same information, but in a different layout. But it's the same information, right? So the information is not copied, it's not duplicated, it's just rendered differently. So
Hmm.
picture a world of connected data where every individual only has access to what they have access to as determined by the owner of that, and the ability to build experiences on top of that, where those
Wow.
experiences can be freely shared, but without releasing the data, because the
Yes.
data is at the controls are at the data layer, right? So it opens up a level of innovation in terms of creating visual experiences because they're not constrained by these artificial things we call silos.
Yes. And speaking of that, we have a few questions about the data environment here. So I'm going to take the questions from George. The first question was, would Cinchy allow somebody to keep track of all the changes in the data environment? And then
Uh, yep. Okay.
sort of a follow-up question was that stuff that you were just showing us, is that brought in from multiple data sources?
It is, yeah. So keeping track. So let me show you an example. So I'm going to go into a connected system. So I've connected Salesforce to our environment. We don't actually use it, but I'll just use it for demo purposes because it's plugged in. So I'm going to create a new record inside of Salesforce. So this is just vanilla Salesforce, just the standard org model. And I'm going to say this is whatever demo user. I'm just going to create a fake contact here. And I'll say this person's a CEO at ABC Inc. And I'll say their email address is whatever, blah, 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 at blah, blah, blah.com.
I lived there before. Yeah, nice.
And I'll say that they work at, or they live at, I don't know, 1 Main Street in NY, and that's good enough. So I'm going to save that record. So I've created a record in a system, which is inherently a silo until
Okay.
you do integration. But now I'm going to go in and I'm going to make a couple of changes to it. So I'm going to change the, let's say the last name, I'm going to add a number 2 to it. And the title, I'm going to change it from CEO to CTO. And then I'm going to make another change here and save that. Okay, so now that I've done that, let's go here, and we've connected that already into the environment. So I'm going to go to an object called people. So this is modeled differently because in Salesforce it's called contacts, and it has its own schema and its own model. But today we call it people. At one point in the past, we didn't call it people; we called it something else. But so we can change the model over time, of course. Just like how your brain reorganizes itself, which is a prerequisite for you to actually learn. But if I go into this data set, you can see this is a small data set. It just has 35,000 records in it. But there you can see the record that I just created, demo user 2, and the title is CTO. And while that record came from Salesforce and it can pop into different skins, you can see it side by side with these records, which came from HubSpot. And if I scroll down, you'll see this record was actually created within Cinchy itself. Because if you have access, you can just right-click insert and add a new row. And notice that some of these fields are read-only, some of them are editable. So even though this came from Salesforce, I can edit this field here, this field called tags. So I can make changes here, so I can extend it. So I've connected it from Salesforce, but also from HubSpot. And I think there's like 4 or 5 other systems that are connected into this unified view of a person, where people can be things like employees or partners or customers or prospects and so on and so forth. They're all just people. And I can open up the different experiences regardless of where the data originated from. So here I can see the data that was entered into Salesforce, but I can also see the tags that I entered as user managed data. And if you remember, I put in the address of 1 Main Street. But wait a minute, where is this coming from? 1 Main Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11201. I never typed that in. So now to the other question, which is, well, can it track changes to the data? If I go to the actual record and highlight it and go to the collaboration log, because what you're seeing is the result of data collaboration, you can see that, hold on, I only made 1 insert and then 1 update in Salesforce. And then if you remember, I made 1 change through this interface, which is what we call the data browser. where I added the tags, but there's been 6 revisions to this record. So you can see it was added in Salesforce, Feb 15th at 11:32. I'm in Eastern time. And you can see I typed in demo user and I put CEO. And then 1 second later, it was enriched by HubSpot. I think it probably just put a HubSpot ID. So what it did is it synced it from Salesforce to the platform, and then from there pushed it out to HubSpot just to keep it all in sync. But then I made a change inside of Salesforce. If you remember, I changed demo user and I added the number 2 to it.
Right.
You can see it's tracking the history of those changes. And if I also changed the CEO, I changed that to CTO, and I can roll it back, I can revert. But then maybe 18 seconds later, Google came in and it took the address, because I just typed in 1 Main Street NY, and it turned it into an intelligent address and basically did address resolution against that. Then I won't go through all this, but then you can see that there's another system that made some more changes, and then there's me, the sole human involved here, where I added the tags, right? So you're seeing humans, APIs, services on the internet, legacy systems, all collaborating on data, where it's now blending that in a unified representation of that, and then linking it to all the other objects, which are exactly the same, right? Wow. To create a universal interface to that. But then if I go back into Salesforce, because again, if you have existing systems, you can't replace them all. Right. But what if you could connect them and make them smarter? So when I look at Salesforce now, if you remember, all I typed in was demo user 2 and CTO. But now I can see I can get to a person 360 view from here, and we'll open up that record, and I can see that the smart address is now brought into Salesforce. So from, if I were just on Salesforce mobile app and I type in their address of 1 Main Street NY, if I were to change that and it now fixes the address for me, that seems super smart, but there is no super intelligence here. Salesforce doesn't have this intelligence, and quite frankly, no individual app can. It's when you start to link things together, people and systems collaborating on data. That is what's called collaborative intelligence, and that's how real intelligence works. That's how the fact that everyone who's participating in the session probably knows, at least in theory, how to make a fire, but none of us were born with that knowledge. It's collaboration where we retain our autonomy. We can collaborate amongst ourselves across the world. Even if we speak different languages, we can even collaborate with our ancestors, and we can pass skills down through generations. That's the real equivalent of intelligence. So that's what we're talking about here, is when you start to link things together while respecting the control over data, a lot of things change.
Yeah,
I went way too long on that. But,
no, I actually love it. And here Ravi just said I learned Dataware today, so thank you. I think people are starting to really get it. So I appreciate you going deeper into this. Can you connect every system? You mentioned it's more efficient when you start linking things together, and we saw this with Salesforce. What are the capabilities? Is there a limit onto how many systems we can link together, or what type of systems?
Yeah, you could only do 7 systems, and then I'm joking.
Magic number.
Magic number, yes. Yeah, you'll never need more than 7 systems. No, so there's no hard limit to it. That being said, it's not just about connecting everything for the sake of it. Is you connect as you go, right? So I've seen so many technology that people get so excited about, where businesses will create budgets to center around the use of a new technology, and they never deliver the ROI. So I think it's critically important that people think of these type of technologies as how to enable them to get to where they want to get to, not to get to a different destination, but to get to where they want to get to in a better, faster, cheaper way. So what that means, though, is if you apply that approach, you're not connecting everything all in one shot. There's no project to connect it. You're delivering the projects that you're going to deliver anyways, and whatever you would have bought, built, or integrated software, by applying Dataware, it means that you're paying it forward. Because if you needed to connect Salesforce for project 1, well, now Salesforce is on the network. It's like it's connected to your Wi-Fi network. When you get a new device, you can just AirPlay to it. You don't have to reconnect it. It's just there, right? It's on the network. And if your next project needs to connect Workday, or maybe you need to extend your CRM and add new data, new capabilities, and you want to build that as autonomous data inside of Dataware natively, well, you can do that. But every project pays it forward to begin that journey. And so for us as an example, like I'll show you just just a slide that summarizes where we are now. Again, we're not our customers. Everyone's story is different, but so we run our entire company on Dataware alone. That being said, we have 106 integrations with the outside world, but we have 0 integrations inside of the company because we don't do app-to-app integrations because we use Dataware.
Right.
But we still have to get data for, I don't know, like currency rates and country codes. And, there's a bunch of different sources that we need to connect in, where we want to connect once and not do integration with every app that needs it. We want to basically enable that data for collaboration. If we had to recreate what we have today, but we were not allowed to use Dataware, we would have to build 2,685 integrations, but we never had to build those integrations. So,
Wow.
and quite frankly, we wouldn't have been able to afford that. So what would we have done? We would have accepted the fact that we have silos.
Yeah. And this is a great solution. And I wanted to quickly go back to the example of, I think you called it demo user 2 or whatever you named that fake character. Yep. When you create that, is there a way that Cinchy or Dataware checks to see if this already exists somewhere in the system, so we don't create duplicates?
Yeah.
And the sort of follow-up for that from George was, what happens when there's a conflicting data between two or more systems?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, but the principles there are very similar to if you're already familiar with MDM solutions. It's not fundamentally different.
Okay.
So you're going to have signatures to determine uniqueness, and it could be as simple as a key, or it could be do these things sound similar, and being able to define rules. And you can do that in either multiple stages where you're pulling in the data and then separately doing the mastering, or you can do it such that it's mastered before it even enters Dataware. And you can do, and by the way, for Dataware, like Cinchy is a Dataware platform, but you could build your own Dataware platform. There's others that are have similar feature sets. You can assemble a Dataware platform, right? It's not like there's only one way to do it. The concept of Dataware is a universal thing, so let's say you're building your own Dataware platform, you can do so, and you can leverage an MDM tool to be able to do that. But that's not anything new or unique. But what I'll also say is that's a byproduct of the fact that we have this legacy where data was siloed, meaning in the future, you're going to have a lot less of that because you're not having each application create data separately, where you have John Smith, Johnny Smith, and Mr. Smith in 3 different systems. Are they the same person? Who knows? Well, why was the data segregated in the first place? It never should have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have a new slogan for Cinchy here from Scott. When your data is everywhere, you need Dataware. I love it. Earlier on, and I didn't ask the question before, but someone asked the question of, what does Cinchy stand for? I mean, I think I already know what it is, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I guess I can interpret that question 2 ways. So what we stand for is access, not copies. No, but what it means is it's a play on the word cinch, which means simple. So it's really just a pun on the simplification, because we like to, like for me, I hate when things are, actually I like when things are complicated because I like to simplify them. That's one of my things. And people who work at our company are similar in that they like to eat the complexity so that others don't have to. So Cinchy means simple. Which is where it's originated from. Although when we settled on the name, I didn't realize that if you Googled Cinchy back in the earlier days, if you go back 4 years, you would have seen a lot of pictures of horses. Because Cinchy is also a term for a horse that is agitated because its cinch is tied too tightly. I had no idea. So we toyed. I actually wanted the logo of an angry horse, but others didn't like that. So we just went with the dots.
Okay. Speaking of logos, well, this is not really your logo, but there's a question from Ravit about your cool profile picture. And does that have anything to do with Dataware? I'm assuming that's your LinkedIn picture, and this is it right there, right? That's the.
Yes. So we have this thing in the company. If I go back to our slides, like we use this when we're talking to prospects and customers and things like that. But if I go through this deck that kind of covers some of the concepts, you'll notice that there's a bunch of characters here, but these are not fake people. These are real people. Like there's that's Michael, and his name is also Michael, and that's Juliet, and that's Max, and they work at Cinchy. And there's Chris and Caitlin, and there's Sylvie, who's on our board, and there's Ron, who runs sales, and there's Tyson, who runs partnerships, and Ali, who's a BDR, and Fatima, who runs training. And so we did this thing where we started to get avatars rendered with an artist for every, initially just employees, but then we extended it. There's Neil, he's a customer. He was a COO at one of our larger customers, and that's Priya. She's a CIO at one of our more recent customers, and that's Trevor, who's a partner, and that's Kevin, who's an investor. So we started to do that for our customers and our partners as well, and it gets people like it actually.
Yeah, I love it, and thank you again for giving me one of those. I think that was super cool. So thank you. All right, so Dan, we're getting closer to the end of our conversation, but for those listening that are fully bought in, right? Dataware is the way forward. They're on board. What can they do today to sort of get started on their journey towards Dataware? Yeah,
so first of all, for anyone who's learning about it for the first time, if you're already bought into it, there's probably something wrong with you. Because you should be more skeptical, because there's a lot of BS in the world. So you should definitely do some more diligence before diving in. And if you go to our site at cinchy.com, there's lots of information, lots of videos and stuff like that. But again, be skeptical with it, and look at other technologies, consider building your own, like look at it all. And, to me, getting people to buy into the concept is the win, not necessarily selling the software, because this concept, I think, has we're talking about something as big as the invention of software. If we play our cards right here, this is not like a little tiny shift. It's a big deal. But let's assume that you've done the diligence and you're either building your own or you're buying a commercially available one, and you're now going where do you actually start? Well, the key, and I touched on this earlier, but just to reemphasize that, is like if this is your current reality where you have applications, and you can see my screen, right?
Yep, I'm sharing it.
Okay. So if your current reality is you've got like an app for everything and a database for every app, and you have all these integrations, you're not going to go and just delete all that. You may have 10 systems, 100 systems, 1,000 systems, maybe 10,000 systems. You're not going to replace all that. So if the future vision is that there's an app for everything and a data store for no app, it's a collaboration platform, kind of like Google Drive, but for data, then the question on where to get started is really whenever you're going to be buying, building, and integrating software. So if you're not going to buy anything, if you're not going to build anything, you don't need to integrate anything, don't use Dataware. But if you are going to do that, then you can apply Dataware and get that pay it forward phenomena. So the whole idea, and this is where people who have heard of data fabric and data mesh and all these things may find it interesting, but I see Dataware very much as a unified approach, because you need the idea of a data fabric to connect data in and out, and bidirectionally, real-time batch, end of day, end of month, real-time data streaming, depending on what you're connecting it to, such that you're not connecting every system to each other. They're each separately connected to Dataware once and once alone. That's the idea of the data fabric, right? It simplifies integration, because that's still integration. It's what we call last copy integration. But the ability to build new applications that don't need a database, they can store data as autonomous data, meaning app-independent data inside of a Dataware platform on its own, and being able to have visualization tools like a Tableau, or Qlik, or Power BI, and AI, et cetera, all use access to data, not copies of data, such that the controls can be defined in the data layer itself, so that they're universally enforced. So regardless if I'm accessing data through here, or here, if I can't see the salary of my peer, I can't see the salary of my peer no matter where I am. And then being able to then unify the experience of that, where it's dynamically generating end user experiences using metadata, which is what you were seeing earlier when I was showing the data browser, that visual experience. And the problem with that is as you start to grow, let's say you have some short-term success, because you're going to start small. You're going to start in a team. You're going to start in an application. You're going to start somewhere. You can't start everywhere. But as you start, if you get that success and you start to replicate that success and it starts to grow, your next problem will be, well, how do you govern in that scale? Because who the heck's going to own that model? You need to decentralize and distribute that and federate it. And how do you define the accountability boundaries there? Well, you want that to be aligned to the business. So that's where the concept of the data mesh comes in, which is creating basically managing data as a product, organizing it into domains, and those domains can be in a hierarchy, and they basically are governance boundaries. But then individual data sets need the controls and the metadata to be contained within it to enable this universal access. So in many ways, Dataware is the combination of these concepts. These are all just concepts. Dataware itself is also a concept, right? And you can build a platform, you can buy a platform that implements that concept. But if you take the elements of data fabric for integration simplification, the idea of data centricity, for those of you who follow Dave McComb and read some of his books, and the idea of that separation, the creation of a universal experience, the web browser, but for the web of connected data, the idea of the data mesh for decentralized governance, and the idea of autonomous data such that the controls can be universally enforced. This plus this plus this plus this equals Dataware.
Great math equation. I love it.
Yes, hopefully there's no, yes.
Awesome, thank you. And the questions keep coming. Hopefully you or someone from the team will have some time to sort of jump in on LinkedIn and address more questions. And as we wrap up, you mentioned something earlier in the session called the DCA, the Data Collaboration Alliance. So just want to give you a chance to tell the audience about that and how they can participate.
Yeah, so if you go to datacollaboration.org, you can learn a lot about the efforts that we are doing to create standards, and there are projects that we are executing. So you can read up, so it's all based on the idea of access not copies, and the whole principle is that being able to own data is irrelevant if you can't actually have control over data. So it's the enablement of control, but you can sign up, you can get access to a pilot environment. We've started a project called Node Zero that is creating connected data sets that started in the data privacy community, but is now expanding into other sectors and other regions. You can read about our standards efforts, specifically with ZeroCopy Integration as our first standard, but that won't be the last standard. And quite frankly, you can join up and contribute and participate. This isn't about Cinchy. It may have been started, but it's what we're doing is we're pulling together people who care about enabling a future where people can have control over their data. And the absence of that, just look at what's happening in the world today with misinformation. And a lot of that can be tied to the fact that you can't trust data.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing this. I think it's very helpful as well. The last question I always like to ask the guests of the Dedicated Show is, where can people go to continue the conversation, or if they had more questions? I know you mentioned some sites like Cinchy.com and datacollaboration.org.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
But where can they find you? Is it Twitter, LinkedIn? What's your preference?
LinkedIn probably. But if you actually do go to Cinchy.com, you can see a little button there that says, what does it say? Ask, what is let me actually go to it. I forget what it says. But you could just ask any questions, and I will actually personally see the questions, but the team will answer that as well. Ask us anything.
I was
so
going to say, you could ask me anything. Okay, close enough.
Yeah, there it is. So feel free to just ask me anything, either video or chat or anything, or hit me up on LinkedIn.
Okay, awesome. Well, Dan, I want to thank you very, very much for your time here today. I personally learned a lot. I keep hearing the terms, data fabric, data mesh, Dataware now, this new term that apparently adds up everything else. So I think it's very helpful for me, very helpful for the audience to get a bit of education on the topic. And I want to thank you for answering all the questions that we threw your way. And I really appreciate your sharing your time with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Awesome. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining the session. We'll see you all online, and hopefully, if you have not signed up for the Dedicated Conference yet, go ahead to dedicated.com/conference, sign up. You will see Cinchy and Dan there again. So hopefully, we'll see you there, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Awesome.